The first warning arrived from beneath the atmosphere of Kheos-IV. Not from orbit, not from deep space, from the planet itself. For 11 months, the colony world had been stable. Kheos-IV was classified as a Category Ash Frontier, a volcanic extraction planet wrapped in permanent storm systems and dense atmospheric mineral saturation. The world produced iridium composites, antimatter shielding substrates, and thermal reactive alloys used in the construction of Earth's deep core warfleets. No one lived on Kheos-IV willingly. The storms erased sunlight for weeks at a time. Entire mining cities were suspended above molten tectonic fractures by magnetic anchor towers drilled kilometers into the crust. Atmospheric ash moved like black ocean tides across the horizon. Lightning storms traveled horizontally instead of vertically. Temperatures on the surface could liquefy exposed armor plating in under 7 minutes. Still, humanity stayed, because Kheos-IV mattered. At 3:17 Colonial Standard Time, the planet's southern hemisphere seismic grid registered synchronized tectonic resonance beneath mining arcology Theta-7. Not an earthquake. A pattern, perfectly rhythmic. The vibrations repeated every 41 seconds. Then the miners disappeared. Entire excavation sectors stopped transmitting simultaneously. Automated drilling systems continued operating normally, but all human biometrics vanished from internal monitoring. No distress calls, no hull breaches, no weapon discharges, just absence. By 4:02 a.m., additional resonance signatures spread beneath 5 neighboring areas. At 4:11 a.m., the storms changed direction. Every atmospheric current across the southern hemisphere reversed simultaneously. That was when Fleet Command activated Admiral Cassian Rhys. Rhys stood motionless inside the combat operations chamber of the CNS Harbinger while tactical projections flooded the bridge in layers of rotating holographic telemetry. Rhys was an aging fleet commander with a narrow, severe face marked by old orbital shrapnel scarring running from the left temple to the jawline. Thin blue neural interface conduits pulsed faintly beneath his armor seams, ammed along his collar and spine like restrained electrical currents. A cybernetic ocular implant replaced his right eye entirely, its dim amber aperture constantly adjusting focus across tactical overlays reflected through the bridge atmosphere. The CNS Harbinger itself dwarfed every vessel in the Kheos system. The ship was a Leviathan-class planetary siege carrier stretching nearly 6 kilometers from prow to engine assembly. Unlike conventional fleet dreadnoughts built around broadside warfare, the Harbinger was constructed as a mobile extinction platform designed for planetary suppression and stellar-scale bombardment operations. The bridge remained silent except for telemetry alerts. Commander Lyra Voss approached the central tactical platform. Kheos-IV's seismic grid just synchronized again, Voss said quietly. Rhys never looked away from the projection. How many? All southern sites. The holographic planet rotated slowly before them. Then the surface moved. Not visually, structurally. Entire tectonic plates beneath the southern hemisphere shifted inward by less than 3 centimeters. Perfectly synchronized. Rhys narrowed his remaining eye. Run deep core imaging. We already did. Voss hesitated. Then she expanded the scan. The bridge fell silent. Something enormous existed beneath the planet's crust. Not a structure. A cavity. A perfectly spherical hollow region nearly 1,200 kilometers wide buried deep beneath the mantle. And it was getting hotter. 3 hours later, Drop Battalion Sigma descended into Sector Theta-7. The deployment carriers screamed through Kheos-IV's upper atmosphere surrounded by volcanic lightning and sheets of black ash dense enough to scrape armor plating raw during descent. Thermal shielding flared white against the storm clouds while magnetic turbulence shook the carriers violently as they cut toward the suspended mining city below. Lieutenant Darian Holt checked his rifle restraints in silence. Holt was a heavily built atmospheric assault officer, wearing a sealed volcanic combat exosuit engineered for extreme thermal environments and high-pressure subterranean warfare. Inside the carrier, every Marine remained silent, not from fear, from pressure, because all colony transmissions had stopped 15 minutes earlier, even automated systems. The city below was dead. The carrier burst through the ash layer. Sector Theta-7 emerged beneath them, and something was wrong with the lights. Entire habitation towers glowed dim red beneath the storm instead of industrial white. The patterns pulsed, like a heartbeat. Holt stared through the viewport. The pulse spread across the entire city. Every tower, every refinery, every transit line, synchronized. Then the mountain beneath the city moved. Not erupted, moved, slowly. Like something beneath the crust was turning over in its sleep. The carrier landed hard against Platform 12. Ash storms hammered the hull immediately. Holt led the Marines into the city. Theta-7 looked abandoned at first glance. Cargo rails still moved automatically between refinery towers. Atmospheric scrubbers continued venting steam into the storm. Maintenance drones floated silently between structures carrying tools and replacement components. But there were no people. No bodies either. Just empty machinery. The Marines advanced through the refinery district beneath towering industrial superstructures disappearing into volcanic haze overhead. Red emergency lights reflected across wet metal platforms while ash accumulated in black dunes against abandoned cargo haulers. Then Sergeant Vale stopped walking. Lieutenant, Holt turned. The refinery wall beside them was vibrating. Very slightly, rhythmically. 41-second intervals. The same pattern from orbit. Then every light inside the district dimmed simultaneously. The ground beneath the city pulsed once. And deep below them, something answered. The sound beneath Theta-7 did not resemble machinery. It resembled pressure. A slow tectonic groan rolling upward through the foundations of the city in measured pulses strong enough to vibrate armor plating and send fine streams of volcanic dust cascading from overhead support structures. Every Marine froze instinctively. Holt raised one armored fist. Sigma Battalion immediately locked into defensive spread formation across the refinery corridor. Motion trackers remained empty. No thermal signatures. No atmospheric contaminants beyond normal volcanic saturation. But the city was moving. Holt could feel it through the exosuit stabilizers beneath his boots. 41 seconds. Another pulse. The entire refinery wall flexed inward by several millimeters like thin metal pressed from the opposite side, then returned to normal. Sergeant Vale slowly turned toward the structure. What the hell is under us? No one answered, because the wall began glowing. Thin crimson lines emerged beneath the refinery plating in branching geometric patterns spreading outward through the metal surface like veins igniting beneath skin. The illumination moved in synchronized waves across the industrial district, disappearing into adjacent towers and cargo structures farther down the city. Holt activated tactical scan projection. Nothing. No energy source. No visible power surge. The glow existed without detectable emission. Then the refinery speakers activated overhead. Not with alarms. With breathing. Slow. Massive. Artificial. Every Marine immediately raised weapons. The sound echoed across the empty city through thousands of industrial loudspeakers simultaneously. Deep inhalation. Mechanical exhalation. Perfectly rhythmic. 41 seconds apart. Commander Voss's voice erupted through the comm network. Sigma, report immediately. Holt keyed the channel. Unknown atmospheric audio contamination across the city. No hostile contact yet. The bridge remained silent for 2 seconds too long. Then Voss answered quietly. It's happening in every colony city. 200 kilometers above Kheos-IV, Admiral Rhys watched the planet begin to change. The southern hemisphere storm systems had stopped behaving naturally. Entire cyclonic fronts rotated inward toward a single location deep beneath the volcanic cloud layer, while lightning activity increased beyond anything previously recorded on the planet. Massive ash vortices stretched upward into the upper atmosphere like black pillars connecting surface to orbit. But the worst change was thermal. The deep core cavity beneath the mantle was heating exponentially. The hollow sphere now emitted temperatures approaching stellar ignition thresholds, and it was growing. Rhys expanded the tactical projection. The cavity walls were smooth, perfectly smooth, not geological, constructed. Commander Voss appeared beside him through live tactical transmission from Surface Command. We found transit access beneath Theta-7, she said. Rhys turned. How deep? Unknown. The scans stop after 800 meters. Cause. Voss hesitated. Then she answered carefully. The rock isn't rock anymore. The descent shaft existed beneath Refinery Sector 9. No colonial records mentioned its construction. The elevator platform itself measured nearly half a kilometer wide and descended into darkness beyond sensor range through a cylindrical shaft lined with metallic black material unlike anything in human engineering databases. Lieutenant Holt stood at the edge staring downward. The walls were breathing, not metaphorically. The material expanded and contracted in slow synchronized pulses identical to the rhythms spreading across the colony. 41 seconds. The Marines said nothing now. Fear had evolved into concentration. Professional soldiers understood panic. This felt different, like proximity. Holt stepped onto the platform. The surface beneath his boots reacted immediately. Thin crimson illumination spread outward beneath the black metallic floor in branching patterns that resembled neural pathways rather than circuitry. "Lieutenant," Sergeant Vale muttered quietly. Holt looked up. The shaft walls were opening. Not mechanically. Sections of the black surface peeled backward in overlapping layers like unfolding muscle tissue, revealing deeper structures beneath the material. Vast vertical channels stretched downward into darkness, carrying rivers of white-hot energy pulsing in synchronized waves far below the planet's crust. The entire shaft was alive, or something close enough to alive that the distinction no longer mattered. Holt keyed the comm network. Sigma descending. The platform dropped instantly. The speed nearly shattered their equilibrium. Artificial gravity compensators inside the exosuits strained violently as the platform accelerated downward through the shaft faster than any industrial elevator system ever constructed by humans. Darkness blurred upward around them. Then the walls began changing. The black metallic material unfolded in layers as the platform descended deeper beneath the crust, exposing recursive internal structures hidden beneath the surface. Massive geometric formations rotated silently behind translucent membranes while enormous vein-like conduits carried streams of white energy throughout the planetary interior. The deeper they traveled, the less the architecture resembled engineering, and the more it resembled anatomy. Holt watched entire chambers open and close beyond the shaft walls like colossal artificial organs operating beneath the planet's surface. Motion tracker alarms suddenly activated. Hundreds of contacts, all around them. The Marines raised rifles immediately. But the contacts weren't moving toward the platform. They were moving with it, keeping pace in the walls. Something enormous was descending beside them through the structure itself. Then the platform stopped. The chamber beneath them was impossible. Sigma Battalion stepped slowly onto a surface overlooking a cavern nearly 30 kilometers wide. The planet's mantle had been hollowed out, and suspended in the center of the cavern was a star. Not metaphorically. An actual contained stellar mass floated within an enormous spherical framework composed of black geometric structures extending throughout the chamber like the interior skeleton of some artificial god. White fusion plasma churned inside the suspended sphere while titanic magnetic containment rings rotated around it in perfect synchronization. The light illuminated the cavern like dawn inside the planet. Every Marine stopped moving because the chamber was full of people. Thousands of them. The missing colonists stood motionless across enormous platforms surrounding the artificial star. Not restrained, not dead, connected. Thin crimson filament structures extended from the black flooring upward into their bodies through the spine, arms, and skull. The colonists stared upward toward the suspended star with completely white eyes while synchronized breathing echoed throughout the cavern in perfect 41-second intervals. Holt slowly lowered his rifle. One of the colonists turned toward him and smiled. Far above the cavern, something opened its eyes. Admiral Rhys received the alert from Orbital Command 3 seconds before the Harbinger's gravity sensors overloaded. Kheos-IV's southern hemisphere split open. Not through eruption, through expansion. Massive tectonic fractures spread across the planet's crust as entire mountain ranges folded backward like separating armor plates. Volcanic oceans erupted skyward while enormous black geometric structures emerged slowly from beneath the mantle. The planet had not been hiding a structure. The planet was the structure, and something inside it was waking up. The colonist moved before Lieutenant Holt could react. Not quickly, smoothly, like gravity itself had shifted around him. The man stepped down from the elevated platform surrounding the artificial star, while crimson filament strands remained attached to his spine and shoulders like living connective tissue stretching from the black flooring beneath him. His mining uniform had partially fused into the material. Sections of volcanic hazard armor absorbed beneath layers of smooth dark growth spreading across his chest and neck. But his face remained human, mostly. The eyes were completely white now. No iris, no pupil, only soft luminous opacity reflecting the light of the suspended stellar mass above the chamber. The smile never changed. Behind him, thousands of connected colonists inhaled simultaneously. 41 seconds. Exhale. The sound rolled across the cavern like synchronized respiration from a single planetary organism. Holt raised his rifle again. The colonist tilted his head, then spoke. Not through sound, through the comm systems. Every marine channel activated simultaneously. Every frequency, every encrypted combat band. The voice arrived layered over itself hundreds of times. We kept it asleep. Several Marines staggered backward instinctively. The transmission carried harmonics no human voice could naturally produce. Multiple tonal ranges overlapped beneath the words like different speakers occupying the same sentence simultaneously. Holt steadied himself. Identify yourself. The colonist's expression twitched slightly. Not confusion. Recognition. Then every connected colonist across the chamber turned toward Sigma Battalion at the exact same moment. We tried. Orbit above Kheos-IV dissolved into chaos. The southern hemisphere fracture expanded across nearly 4,000 kilometers of planetary surface, as tectonic plates separated along glowing geometric fault lines spreading beneath the crust, in recursive patterns. Entire volcanic mountain chains collapsed inward while black metallic superstructures emerged from beneath the mantle layer by layer. Not buildings, mechanisms. Colossal curved structures unfolded from inside the planet like dormant machinery expanding after millennia of compression. Massive ring assemblies larger than cities rotated slowly through clouds of volcanic debris, while streams of white thermal energy erupted upward from newly exposed fissures in the crust. Admiral Rhys stood motionless at the tactical platform aboard the Harbinger. Every fleet projection around him was turning red. Orbital stability around the planet was collapsing. Gravity itself was changing. Commander Voss moved beside him rapidly, dragging streams of tactical telemetry through the holographic displays. Massive magnetic distortion spreading across low orbit. How massive? Voss enlarged the readings. Rhys felt the silence spread across the bridge. The distortion field extended nearly 90,000 kilometers beyond the planet, large enough to trap the fleet. Then the first Harbinger alarms activated. Deep, mechanical, ancient. The Leviathan-class carrier vibrated beneath their feet. Not from attack, from resonance. Rhys narrowed his eye. It's communicating. Deep beneath the mantle, the artificial star brightened. Lieutenant Holt shielded his visor instinctively as the contained stellar sphere intensified from white to blinding gold. The rotating containment rings surrounding it accelerated slowly through the cavern, while black geometric support structures unfolded outward across the chamber ceiling in enormous recursive formations. The colonists began moving. Thousands stepped away from the platform simultaneously, while crimson filament structures detached from their bodies with wet metallic sounds. None of them appeared injured by the separation. If anything, they looked relieved. The first Marine to die was Corporal Neris. Something emerged from the cavern wall behind him. Not a creature. A hand. Massive black geometric segments unfolded from the surface silently before reshaping into an articulated limb large enough to crush armored vehicles. The structure resembled no biological anatomy, yet moved with horrifying organic fluidity as segmented black surfaces rotated against each other like living machinery. The hand closed around Neris instantly. His exosuit collapsed like paper. Blood exploded across the chamber floor. Then the wall opened wider. Sigma Battalion finally saw what lived inside the planet. The entity unfolded from the cavern structure in layers. Its body consisted of enormous interlocking black geometric plates continuously rearranging themselves around an internal skeletal framework of white luminous energy channels pulsing like artificial veins. Limbs emerged through recursive unfolding structures rather than joints, extending and reshaping through impossible mechanical organic transformations as it moved. The head possessed no face, only a smooth curved surface split vertically by a narrow aperture, emitting cold white light, bright enough to cast shadows across the cavern. It stood nearly 20 meters tall, and dozens more were waking within the walls around them. Contest. The chamber exploded into gunfire. Rail rifles hammered the nearest construct with hypersonic tungsten rounds powerful enough to penetrate armored dropships. The rounds vanished into the black plating without visible impact. Not deflected, absorbed. The construct moved forward. Reality distorted around it. Sections of the cavern floor folded upward in geometric waves while the air itself compressed hard enough to rupture exposed equipment and crack visor glass. Another Marine disappeared. Not killed. Folded. His body compressed inward impossibly fast before collapsing into a thin vertical line and vanishing entirely. The squad broke formation immediately. Holt fired continuously while dragging Sergeant Vale behind cover as more constructs emerged from the walls around them. They were not attacking strategically. They were converging toward the artificial star, toward the humans, toward something specific. Then the star pulsed. Every construct froze. The chamber fell silent. The white aperture in the nearest entity widened slowly, and for the first time, the thing spoke. Containment breach acknowledged. Admiral Rhys watched the planet open. Entire sections of Kheos-IV's crust separated outward as massive internal structures rose from beneath the mantle into orbit itself. Gigantic black spires erupted through the atmosphere trailing volcanic fire and streams of molten debris, while rotating ring assemblies emerged around the planet, like components of some impossible planetary engine activating after geological ages of dormancy. The fleet opened fire first. Hundreds of human warships unleashed kinetic bombardment simultaneously. Rail batteries, fusion lances, orbital plasma strikes. Enough firepower to sterilize continents. The bombardment struck the rising structures directly and vanished. The energy didn't disperse, didn't explode. The structures consumed it. Entire weapons impacts collapsed inward across the black surfaces before disappearing beneath expanding waves of white light spreading through the planetary mechanisms below. Commander Voss stared at the readings. It's converting the energy. How? No idea. Then the planet answered. The first orbital defense beam emerged from the southern hemisphere fracture without warning. A column of compressed white stellar plasma erupted upward through the atmosphere and crossed 8,000 kilometers of space in less than a second. 3 fleet destroyers disappeared instantly, not exploded, erased. Their hulls disintegrated into expanding particulate ash before their reactor signatures even had time to fail. The Harbinger shuddered violently. "Evasive burn," Voss shouted. The Leviathan carrier rotated hard through orbit as additional plasma lances erupted from the planet below, carving through human formations with surgical precision. Rhys watched another cruiser vanish from tactical projection. Then another, then 12 more. Kheos-IV had become a weaponized star, and something beneath its crust had just awakened completely. Deep below the surface, the artificial sun opened. Lieutenant Holt stared upward in horror as fractures spread slowly across the contained stellar sphere suspended in the center of the cavern. Thin black geometric structures emerged from inside the star itself, pushing outward through the plasma like skeletal fingers piercing skin. The containment rings accelerated. The chamber began shaking. The colonists smiled again, and the thing inside the star started climbing out. The thing emerging from the artificial star was larger than the chamber itself. At first, Lieutenant Holt could not understand what he was seeing. The fractures spreading across the suspended stellar sphere widened slowly as black geometric structures pushed outward through the contained plasma in massive layered formations resembling armored skeletal limbs unfolding from inside a cocoon of living fusion fire. Then the limbs kept growing. The cavern shook violently as containment rings rotated around the stellar mass at impossible velocity, their magnetic fields screaming through the air in visible arcs of white electrical distortion. Entire sections of the surrounding platforms collapsed inward while thousands of connected colonists remained standing motionless beneath the expanding light. The construct entities surrounding Sigma Battalion immediately retreated. Not from fear, from obedience. Every one of them turned toward the opening star and lowered themselves into rigid kneeling positions across the chamber floor. Holt backed away slowly. Fall back. No one moved fast enough. The star ruptured. White stellar plasma exploded outward through the cavern like an artificial solar eruption contained inside the planet's hollow mantle. The thermal wave vaporized entire platform sections instantly while molten debris and expanding magnetic distortions hammered Sigma Battalion across the chamber. Holt's exosuit screamed warning alerts as emergency thermal shielding activated automatically across the armor. Then the thing inside the star stepped forward. The entity unfolded in stages. At first glance it resembled a colossal humanoid silhouette nearly 200 meters tall. But the illusion dissolved immediately as its structure continued rearranging itself while emerging from the stellar sphere. Massive black geometric plates rotated continuously around a shifting internal framework of white stellar energy visible through openings in the armor-like surfaces. Entire sections of its body existed in overlapping spatial configurations that refused to remain stable under observation. Its limbs extended too far. Its proportions changed constantly. Its torso unfolded through recursive layers revealing deeper structures hidden inside itself. And where a face should have existed, there was only a circular gravitational void surrounded by rotating white rings of compressed light. The cavern bent around it. Gravity failed instantly. Sigma Battalion was thrown sideways as the entity completed its emergence from the artificial sun. Entire sections of the chamber floor folded upward into impossible geometric shapes, while rivers of molten mantle rock floated weightlessly through the air around the godlike construct. The colonists inhaled simultaneously. 41 seconds. Exhale. The entity looked down at them, then looked at Holt, and the void where its face should have been expanded slightly. Recognition. Orbit above Kheos-IV had become a battlefield of extinction-scale fire. Rhys stood aboard the Harbinger as human fleet formations collapsed around the planet under continuous plasma bombardment from the awakened planetary systems below. The black structures emerging from Kheos-IV's crust now extended beyond the atmosphere entirely. Gigantic ring assemblies rotated through low orbit while thousands of smaller geometric constructs detached from the planetary surface and accelerated toward the fleet like fragments of an awakening machine civilization. Human ships opened fire continuously. Rail cannons hammered space with relativistic tungsten impacts. Fusion torpedoes detonated across orbital trajectories. Directed plasma lances carved through expanding clouds of volcanic debris. None of it slowed the structures. Every impact was absorbed, converted, fed into the expanding energy networks spreading across the planet. Commander Voss stared at the tactical overlays. It's building something. Rhys narrowed his remaining eye. The rising structures were connecting. Across orbit, across the atmosphere, across the planetary crust. Massive geometric arrays were forming around Kheos-IV like components of a single mechanism assembling itself in real time. Then long-range scans updated. The bridge fell silent. The planet's internal energy output had exceeded fusion star thresholds. Kheos-IV was no longer behaving like a planet. It was transitioning into a reactor. Rhys understood immediately. It's trying to ignite. Deep beneath the mantle, Lieutenant Holt struggled to stand against collapsing gravity fields while the stellar entity descended fully into the cavern. Its size distorted perspective itself. Entire platform districts folded inward around its movement, while molten tectonic fractures opened across the chamber floor beneath every step. The white energy flowing through its shifting geometric frame illuminated the cavern brighter than daylight, despite existing kilometers beneath the planet's crust. The construct entities surrounding the chamber remained kneeling. The colonists remained smiling. Only the humans still resisted. Sergeant Vale raised his rail rifle. Fire! Sigma Battalion unleashed everything remaining. Hundreds of hypersonic tungsten rounds crossed the cavern and impacted the entity's shifting black surfaces simultaneously. The rounds disappeared. Not absorbed this time. Erased. The space directly around the entity fractured momentarily, folding inward through localized gravitational collapse before stabilizing again. The thing continued walking forward. Then the circular void at the center of its head expanded. Holt felt pressure enter his skull instantly. Not sound. Thought. Images flooded through his mind faster than cognition could process. Worlds opening. Stars consumed. Planets hollowed into reactors. Entire civilizations connected into geometric networks spanning galaxies. And beneath it all, hunger. The entity was not a conqueror, not an empire, not a species. It was infrastructure. A machine built to manufacture stars. The artificial sun suspended in the cavern was not a power source. It was an egg, and Kheos-IV itself had been transformed into an incubation system long before humanity ever arrived. Holt staggered backward violently. The entity spoke directly into every mind in the chamber. Combustion sequence incomplete. Then the planet shook hard enough to crack the cavern walls. The Harbinger entered atmosphere at full burn. Commander Voss gripped the tactical platform as the 6-kilometer siege carrier plunged through Kheos-IV's upper storm systems surrounded by expanding shock waves of volcanic ash and atmospheric fire. Massive thermal shields blazed across the Leviathan carrier's armored hull, while orbital debris exploded around the ship during descent. Rhys stood unmoving. Target? Voss enlarged the tactical projection. The southern hemisphere fracture, the source of the ignition field. The cavity beneath the mantle. The Harbinger was humanity's last planetary siege vessel capable of carrying stellar-grade annihilation weapons inside atmosphere. And Rhys intended to use them. The bridge alarms intensified. Additional constructs were launching from the planet's surface now. Thousands. Smaller than the orbital structures but accelerating at terrifying speeds through the ash storms surrounding the descending carrier. The first impact struck the Harbinger's dorsal hull hard enough to shake the entire vessel. Then another. Then dozens more. The tactical displays lit with boarding breach warnings. The constructs were attaching themselves directly to the ship. Rhys finally moved. All internal defense battalions mobilize. Another impact. This one penetrated. The bridge lights flickered. Voss looked upward slowly as something began cutting through the armored ceiling above them. Not mechanically. The metal itself was unfolding. Deep below the mantle, the stellar entity stopped moving. The circular gravitational void within its head rotated slowly toward the cavern ceiling, toward orbit, toward the descending Harbinger. The white energy flowing through its body intensified. The entire chamber began vibrating. The construct entities rose from kneeling positions simultaneously, and the artificial star behind the entity started collapsing inward. Holt realized what was happening seconds before the planetary alarms activated. The thing beneath Kheos-IV was preparing ignition, not of the reactor, of the planet itself. The first boarding breach opened directly above the Harbinger's command bridge. Admiral Rhys watched the armored ceiling deform inward as black geometric fractures spread across the reinforced plating like cracks moving through glass underwater. The metal did not melt. It unfolded. Layer after layer of battleship armor separated into rotating segmented patterns while white luminous energy leaked through the seams from something cutting through the vessel from the outside. Commander Voss stepped backward instinctively. Internal defense teams are 6 minutes out. We don't have 6 minutes. The final armor layer peeled open. A construct descended through the breach silently. Up close, the thing was even worse. Its body appeared assembled from overlapping black metallic plates arranged around an internal skeleton of white stellar energy pulsing through transparent channels beneath the armor surfaces. Limbs extended and reshaped continuously through recursive mechanical motion while sections of its structure shifted between solid geometry and impossible folded spatial distortions that refused to stabilize visually. It landed without sound. Then the bridge gravity failed. Several officers slammed sideways into tactical stations as localized gravitational pressure bent violently toward the construct's body. Consoles ruptured, glass fractured, holographic projections collapsed into static. The construct turned toward Rhys and charged. The Harbinger's bridge erupted into kinetic fire. Security personnel opened fire immediately with magnetic accelerator carbines, hypersonic rounds hammering into the construct's torso in rapid succession. The impacts vanished into expanding waves of white light spreading beneath the entity's black armor plating. The thing accelerated directly through the gunfire. Not running. Sliding. Space itself bent around its movement as if gravity were pulling the construct forward faster than physical motion allowed. Rhys drew his sidearm, a relic, old-fashioned chemically propelled tungsten rounds designed specifically for anti-synthetic close-quarters combat during the machine uprisings beyond Europa. The construct reached the nearest officer. Its arm unfolded. The officer disappeared. Not killed. Compressed into a thin, expanding distortion that collapsed inward and vanished from existence entirely. Rhys fired. The tungsten rounds struck the entity's head assembly hard enough to fracture portions of the black plating away from its structure. White stellar energy erupted outward from the damage like exposed plasma veins. For the first time, the construct reacted. The gravitational distortions surrounding it destabilized momentarily. Rhys saw the opening immediately. Kinetic rounds affect the internal lattice. Commander Voss transmitted the update fleet-wide as security forces switched ammunition feeds throughout the bridge. The construct attacked again. This time, the bridge fought back. Dozens of tungsten impacts shredded portions of the entity's outer plating, while concentrated kinetic fire forced the construct backward through expanding clouds of white energy leaking from its damaged frame. Then the construct screamed. Not audibly. Through the ship. Every surface aboard the Harbinger vibrated simultaneously as a harmonic resonance pulse exploded outward from the entity's body. Bridge lighting detonated. Tactical systems overloaded. Several crew members collapsed instantly with blood streaming from eyes and ears. The construct's damaged torso unfolded wider, and something inside it started waking up. Far below the mantle, Lieutenant Holt watched the artificial god ignite the planet. The stellar entity raised one impossible shifting arm toward the collapsing artificial sun suspended behind it, while the cavern around Sigma Battalion began disintegrating under escalating gravitational pressure. The planet itself was changing. Entire sections of the chamber walls unfolded into expanding geometric arrays extending deeper beneath the mantle than the eye could follow. White energy surged upward through colossal conduit systems hidden inside the crust, while tectonic vibrations intensified throughout the cavern. The entity spoke directly into their minds again. Combustion sequence entering final phase. Then the artificial star collapsed inward another kilometer. Holt finally understood the purpose of Kheos-IV. The world was not an installation. It was fuel. Every volcanic layer, every magnetic storm, every thermal fracture across the planet existed to sustain the ignition process beneath the crust. The colony had unknowingly spent years mining materials directly into the planetary mechanisms awakening around them. Humanity had been feeding the machine. Sergeant Vale grabbed Holt's shoulder violently. "We need to move." The cavern ceiling split apart. Not from collapse, from expansion. Gigantic black structures unfolded from inside the mantle, while rivers of molten magma reversed direction entirely, flowing upward through newly exposed channels leading deeper toward the planetary core. The stellar entity turned toward Sigma Battalion again. The circular void within its head widened slowly. Holt felt his thoughts beginning to fracture under the pressure radiating from the thing. Then the entity focused on him specifically, and showed him Earth. Admiral Rhys stood over the ruined construct as bridge fires spread across damaged tactical stations around him. The entity was still alive. Barely. Its black geometric frame had partially collapsed under sustained tungsten bombardment, exposing an intricate internal lattice of rotating white structures nested impossibly deep inside its body. The damaged sections continued rearranging themselves rapidly as if trying to heal. Commander Voss stared at the exposed lattice. "It's not mechanical." "What is it?" Voss zoomed the scans closer. The internal structures resembled stellar plasma trapped inside shifting geometric fields smaller than atoms, yet extending through dimensions human sensors could barely interpret. Then she saw the pattern. Her expression changed immediately. "Admiral." Rhys looked up. "It's a reactor." The construct twitched violently. The white energy inside its frame surged brighter. Every surviving bridge officer instinctively stepped backward. Voss stared at the readings in disbelief. The constructs aren't soldiers. The damaged entity unfolded wider. Its internal lattice expanded outward into the bridge air. The planet is building stars inside them. Then the construct detonated. The explosion ripped through the Harbinger's upper command decks like a contained solar eruption. White stellar plasma burst outward from the dying construct's body, with enough force to vaporize entire sections of armored bulkhead instantly. The bridge vanished behind expanding thermal shock waves while emergency blast barriers slammed down across surviving compartments throughout the carrier. The Harbinger descended deeper into atmosphere. Uncontrolled. Outside the ship, Kheos-IV had become unrecognizable. The southern hemisphere no longer resembled a planetary surface. Massive geometric structures stretched from the exposed mantle into orbit itself, while volcanic oceans spiraled upward through gravitational distortions surrounding the ignition arrays. Entire mountain ranges had unfolded into rotating mechanical formations spanning hundreds of kilometers across the surface, and beneath it all, something enormous was rising toward orbit from inside the planet. Lieutenant Holt collapsed to one knee as the stellar entity's vision flooded his mind completely. He saw thousands of worlds, not conquered, converted, entire planets hollowed into ignition chambers beneath black geometric superstructures extending across continents. Artificial suns burned beneath planetary crusts while colossal stellar entities emerged from those worlds and traveled outward into the galaxy carrying new ignition seeds toward additional systems. Civilizations weren't enemies to these things. They were catalysts. Biological systems accelerated planetary preparation. Industrialization fed thermal conversion. Population density stabilized resource extraction. Humanity had not discovered Kheos-IV. The planet had attracted humanity intentionally. The entity's voice entered his thoughts again. "You increase combustion efficiency." Holt forced himself upright through overwhelming pressure. "How many worlds?" The answer arrived instantly. Insufficient remaining matter for accurate calculation. Then the entity looked upward, toward the descending Harbinger, and for the first time, it acknowledged danger. The Harbinger stabilized barely 200 kilometers above the planetary fracture zone. Emergency systems screamed throughout the carrier, while secondary fires spread through damaged interior decks following the bridge detonation. Rhys emerged from emergency bulkheads covered in blood and ash. One side of his command coat had burned away entirely, exposing damaged exoskeletal plating beneath. Voss met him beside the surviving tactical station. "We still have the Helios weapon online." Rhys looked at her carefully. The Helios system. Humanity's final stellar siege weapon. A directed artificial singularity lance capable of destabilizing planetary cores through induced gravitational collapse. Never deployed. Never tested against active stellar ignition. Outside the viewport, Kheos-IV glowed brighter than a rising sun. The planet was beginning to ignite. Rhys stared at the expanding fracture consuming the southern hemisphere, then gave the order. "Arm Helios." The Helios weapon awakened beneath the Harbinger like a chained apocalypse, finally given permission to breathe. Deep inside the carrier, kilometer-long containment chambers opened in synchronized sequence beneath the ventral spine, while magnetic locking systems disengaged one layer at a time throughout the ship's central weapons core. Entire reactor districts dimmed as power rerouted toward the Singularity Lance assembly hidden inside the vessel since the final years of the Jovian extermination campaigns. Voss watched the power transfer readings climb into impossible ranges, primary fusion reserves exhausted. Rhys never looked away from the planet. "Pull from life support." Several bridge officers turned instinctively. Rhys ignored them. "Pull everything." The Harbinger darkened. Across the 6-kilometer siege carrier, Non-essential systems died one after another as power grids redirected into the Helios chambers below. Interior lighting faded to deep crimson emergency illumination while atmospheric stabilizers slowed throughout the ship. Even the engines weakened. The carrier began falling deeper into Kheos-IV's gravity well. But beneath the ship, the weapon charged. Far below the mantle, Holt watched the stellar entity become aware of the Harbinger. The thing's impossible body shifted toward the surface while the artificial sun behind it continued collapsing inward through escalating compression cycles. Entire layers of the cavern folded around the entity's movement as gravitational distortion intensified throughout the planetary interior. The construct entities surrounding Sigma Battalion moved immediately. Not toward the humans, toward the surface. Thousands of black geometric forms unfolded from the cavern walls and accelerated upward through vertical transit channels leading toward orbit. Rivers of molten magma spiraled around them like blood moving through arteries beneath the crust. The planetary machine was mobilizing. Vale staggered beside Holt as tectonic fractures spread across the chamber floor. "We're out of time." Holt barely heard him. The stellar entity was still inside his mind. Fragments of impossible memory continued flooding through the pressure radiating from the thing. Stars harvested, planets ignited, artificial suns born inside hollow worlds across extinct galaxies. And at the center of everything, a structure, something vastly larger than the entities themselves. Something waiting. The entity's voice entered Holt's thoughts again. Termination attempt recognized. Then the cavern ceiling opened. Orbit above Kheos-IV disappeared behind fire. The remaining human fleet fought desperately through expanding swarms of ascending constructs erupting from the planet below. Thousands of black geometric entities accelerated upward through volcanic storm clouds and impacted human warships directly in coordinated assault waves. Cruisers died first. Constructs breached hull plating through localized gravitational collapse, folding armored sections inward before detonating from within using contained stellar reactions generated inside their bodies. Destroyers vanished in expanding white thermal blooms. Carrier groups broke formation. Fragments of burning ships rained downward into the atmosphere, trailing debris fields across the volcanic storms. And through it all, the Harbinger descended directly toward the planetary fracture. The carrier looked less like a warship now, and more like a falling fortress wrapped in atmospheric fire. Entire sections of its outer hull glowed molten red beneath thermal stress, while exposed weapons batteries continued firing continuously into the ascending construct swarms surrounding the vessel. The Helios weapon continued charging. Voss stared at the telemetry. Singularity threshold at 63%. Rhys remained motionless. Planetary ignition? Voss checked again, then went pale. 91. Deep inside the Harbinger, the Helios chambers opened fully. The weapon resembled no human cannon. A kilometer-wide spinal aperture extended through the center of the ship, surrounded by colossal magnetic containment rings rotating around a growing sphere of darkness. Suspended in the middle of the chamber, not black. Absence. The singularity forming inside the containment field, bent surrounding light inward, while streams of white fusion energy spiraled into the growing gravitational core from every reactor still functioning aboard the carrier. The ship groaned around it. Reality itself strained. Several containment operators collapsed unconscious as localized time dilation spread through the chamber. One technician looked directly into the forming singularity and aged 40 years in 3 seconds. Holt finally understood the scale of the planetary machine. The cavern walls surrounding Sigma Battalion had unfolded completely now, exposing a vast internal network extending throughout the hollow mantle beneath Kheos-IV. Colossal geometric structures rotated through oceans of magma, while artificial energy conduits carried white stellar plasma across distances larger than entire continents. The planet was not generating power, it was manufacturing a star from the inside out, and the stellar entity standing before them was only one part of the process. The thing raised one massive shifting arm toward the opening ceiling above. The artificial sun behind it collapsed inward again. The planet screamed. Not metaphorically. A planetary-scale resonance pulse erupted through the mantle hard enough to rupture sections of the cavern, while every colonist connected to the machine inhaled simultaneously. 41 seconds. Exhale. Then their bodies started burning. White light spread beneath the skin of every connected colonist across the chamber. Thin fractures of stellar illumination split through flesh and bone as the planetary machine redirected energy through the human network surrounding the artificial sun. They did not scream. They smiled. Holt stared in horror. They're fueling it. The stellar entity turned toward him. Biological ignition stabilization successful. Then Earth appeared in Holt's mind again. Not memory. Prediction. Admiral Rhys stood alone at the surviving tactical platform as the Harbinger breached the lower atmosphere directly above the southern fracture zone. Below the carrier, the planet had opened completely. The exposed mantle glowed white-hot beneath expanding geometric superstructures, extending from the crust into the sky, like the framework of some planetary engine nearing activation. Vast rotating ring assemblies surrounded the fracture, while rivers of molten magma spiraled upward through gravitational distortions surrounding the ignition arrays. And in the center of it all, something colossal was rising toward the surface from beneath the mantle. The stellar entity. Even from orbit, its scale dwarfed cities. Voss looked at the firing solution. Then at Rhys. If Helios fails, Rhys answered quietly. There won't be anything left to fail. The bridge lights dimmed completely. The Helios weapon reached full charge. Throughout the Harbinger, warning klaxons shifted tone for the first time since the battle began. Not danger warnings. Execution confirmations. The singularity lance was ready. Deep below the surface, the stellar entity looked upward directly at the descending Harbinger. Then it spoke through every active communication channel across the planet simultaneously. Every human heard it. Fleet crews, Marines, pilots, bridge officers, the surviving colonists. Even Holt beneath the mantle. The voice arrived layered with impossible harmonic pressure capable of vibrating armor plating and cracking exposed stone. Combustion obstruction acknowledged. The entity raised both arms toward the surface. The artificial sun behind it collapsed inward one final time, and Kheos-IV began turning into a star. Rhys gave the order. Fire Helios. The Harbinger split open beneath the storm. The singularity lance emerged from the ventral spine surrounded by rotating magnetic rings larger than battleships, while the growing sphere of gravitational collapse suspended inside the weapon chamber, compressed into a narrow beam of impossible darkness. Then the weapon fired. Space disappeared. A column of compressed singularity distortion crossed the atmosphere instantly and struck the planetary fracture directly above the rising stellar entity. The world broke. The Helios lance did not explode. It erased. The singularity beam punched through Kheos-IV's atmosphere and entered the southern fracture zone without resistance, a narrow column of compressed gravitational annihilation surrounded by collapsing rings of distorted light. Every volcanic storm around the impact path folded inward instantly, while atmospheric layers compressed hard enough to ignite entire continents in expanding thermal shockwaves. Then the beam reached the ignition chamber beneath the mantle. Reality collapsed. Holt saw the singularity impact from inside the cavern itself. The world folded. The descending column of darkness pierced through the opening ceiling above and struck the artificial sun directly behind the stellar entity. For one impossible second, the entire chamber stretched sideways as gravitational forces tore through the planetary machine beneath Kheos-IV. The artificial star imploded. Not violently, hungrily. White stellar plasma vanished inward through the singularity impact point while the surrounding containment rings twisted apart and disappeared into expanding gravitational fractures spreading across the cavern. The stellar entity reacted instantly. For the first time since its emergence, it panicked. The shifting geometric structures composing its impossible body destabilized violently as white stellar energy erupted uncontrolled through fractures spreading beneath its black armor plating. Entire sections of its recursive frame collapsed inward while the circular gravitational void within its head distorted erratically. The thing screamed, this time audibly. The sound ruptured the cavern. Molten rock exploded upward from the chamber floor as tectonic pressure waves tore through the mantle around them. Entire construct formations surrounding the entity shattered apart mid-motion, their bodies collapsing into expanding clouds of white plasma and fragmented black geometry. The planet itself convulsed, and far above them, Kheos-IV began dying. Orbit ceased to exist. The Helios impact destabilized the planet's gravity field instantly, tearing apart the expanding ignition arrays surrounding Kheos-IV, while thousands of orbital constructs lost synchronization simultaneously. Human ships vanished into expanding gravitational fractures. Construct swarms disintegrated mid-flight. Fragments of burning debris spiraled outward across collapsing orbital trajectories as the planet below began folding inward around the singularity wound punched through its mantle. The Harbinger barely survived the backlash. The 6-kilometer siege carrier tumbled violently through expanding atmospheric shockwaves while entire sections of its outer hull sheared away beneath gravitational distortion spreading outward from the planetary fracture below. Bridge alarms became meaningless noise. Voss slammed against the tactical platform as emergency inertial compensators failed across multiple decks. Planetary core collapse accelerating. Admiral Rhys pulled himself upright through failing gravity. How long? Voss checked the projections, then stared silently. The numbers were impossible. Kheos-IV is collapsing into the singularity. The planet beneath them had started sinking inward. Deep below the mantle, the stellar entity tried to save itself. Its massive shifting body unfolded wider through impossible recursive geometries as enormous black structural appendages erupted outward into the collapsing cavern around it. White stellar energy surged violently throughout the entity's frame, while gravity distorted hard enough to tear entire sections of the chamber apart. But the Helios lance had struck the one thing the machine could not survive, the artificial sun. The ignition process reversed instantly. Instead of birthing a star outward, the planetary machine was collapsing inward toward the singularity consuming the mantle. Lieutenant Holt struggled to remain standing as the cavern tore itself apart around Sigma Battalion. Sergeant Vale grabbed him violently. "We need extraction now." No one was coming. Above them, the planet was folding into itself. Entire mantle sections collapsed inward through expanding gravitational fractures while rivers of magma disappeared into widening voids, where space itself no longer behaved correctly. The stellar entity turned toward Holt again. Its voice entered his mind, fractured now. "Unstable. We preserve." The entity staggered. Massive portions of its shifting frame collapsed inward and vanished into localized singularities forming inside its body. Then Holt understood something horrifying. The thing was afraid, not of death, of extinction. The entity reached toward him through collapsing gravity fields and showed him the structure again. The thing hidden beyond the stars. The thing waiting for the ignition network to finish. Then the entity's body split apart. Kheos-IV began imploding visibly from orbit. The southern hemisphere collapsed inward first as the singularity wound beneath the mantle expanded uncontrollably through the planetary core. Entire tectonic plates folded downward, while volcanic oceans vanished into widening gravitational fractures consuming the surface layer by layer. The geometric ignition arrays surrounding the planet broke apart across orbit. Massive ring structures twisted into spiraling debris fields before collapsing into streams of molten wreckage pulled toward the dying world below. Commander Voss stared through the Harbinger's damaged viewport. "It's sinking." Rhys said nothing. Because she was right. The planet looked like it was drowning in itself. The Harbinger's engines struggled against collapsing gravity while surviving fleet remnants attempted emergency evacuation burns away from the expanding singularity field, consuming the system. Many ships failed. Cruisers vanished silently as their hulls stretched into thin gravitational distortions before disappearing entirely into the collapsing planetary well. Then another alert activated. Surface survivors. Rhys looked immediately. Lieutenant Holt's transponder still existed, deep beneath the mantle, inside the collapsing ignition chamber. Voss turned toward him sharply. "We can't go back down there," Rhys answered instantly. "Yes, we can." The cavern was dying. Lieutenant Holt dragged Sergeant Vale across collapsing platforms, while Sigma Battalion survivors fought through expanding gravitational fractures consuming the ignition chamber piece by piece. The colonists were burning alive now. White stellar light erupted through their bodies as the planetary machine failed catastrophically around them. One after another, the connected humans collapsed into expanding ash illuminated from within by fading fusion light, still smiling. The stellar entity continued disintegrating nearby. Its impossible frame broke apart through recursive collapse while fragments of black geometric armor floated upward into expanding void fractures forming throughout the cavern. Then the thing looked directly at Holt one final time and spoke clearly. The seed remains. The entity collapsed inward. Gone, not destroyed. Compressed beyond visibility inside its own gravitational failure. Then the cavern ceiling exploded. The Harbinger descended through the rupture surrounded by volcanic fire and collapsing debris. The siege carrier entered the mantle itself. Admiral Rhys stood inside the deployment bay as emergency extraction teams launched into the dying ignition chamber below. The Harbinger groaned continuously around them while gravitational collapse spread throughout the surrounding mantle faster every second. Commander Voss appeared beside him. The singularity is destabilizing. How long? 4 minutes until total planetary collapse. Rhys looked toward the burning cavern beyond the bay doors. 4 minutes to escape a dying world collapsing into an artificial singularity. Then Holt's signal moved. Rhys activated the extraction channel. Lieutenant. Static answered first. Then Holt's voice. We found what was inside the planet. Rhys stared into the collapsing firestorm beyond the bay. What was it? Long silence. Then Holt answered quietly. A factory. Kheos-IV had died beneath them. The Harbinger escaped the mantle only seconds before total collapse began consuming the planetary surface. Entire continents folded inward through expanding gravitational fractures while oceans of magma spiraled into the singularity forming where the planetary core had once existed. The world shrank, literally. Kheos-IV compressed inward beneath impossible gravitational pressure as the Helios wound consumed the remains of the ignition machine hidden beneath the crust. Then the planet vanished. A collapsing sphere of white stellar fire imploded silently against the darkness of space, and the artificial sun died with it. 3 hours later, the surviving fleet drifted through the ruins of the Kheos system. Thousands of ships were gone. Entire battle groups erased. The Harbinger itself had lost nearly 40% of its mass during the engagement. But humanity survived. Admiral Rhys stood alone on the damaged bridge watching the expanding debris cloud where Kheos-IV had once existed. Commander Voss approached slowly. We recovered something from the mantle. Rhys turned. Voss hesitated. Then activated the projection. A small black geometric object rotated silently above the tactical display. Smooth, incactive, perfectly intact. The object pulsed once. 41 seconds. Then again. Rhys stared at it in silence. Far beyond the system, something answered.